The emaciated mare summoned her final reserves of strength, teeth bared as she protected something hidden beneath her trembling body. When Jacob finally saw the tiny newborn foal struggling for life underneath her, the cruel reality silenced everyone around him. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning mist hung low over the rolling meadows of Willow Creek Ranch, painting the landscape in soft, ethereal hues of gold and silver. The ranch had stood for generations, weathering storms both literal and figurative, a testament to the resilience of the Thompson family who owned it. But today, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the fog, the usual tranquility of the place was disturbed by an urgent phone call. Jacob Thompson, a weathered rancher with 40 years of experience etched into the lines of his face, gripped his phone tightly as he listened to his neighbor's breathless voice. "There's a horse, Jacob. Found her at the edge of my property, near the old creek crossing. Never seen her before. She's in bad shape, looks abandoned. Been trying to approach her since dawn, but she won't let anyone near." Jacob sighed deeply, his breath forming a small cloud in the crisp morning air. Abandoned horses weren't uncommon in these parts, especially with the economic downturn hitting rural communities hard. People who could no longer afford to care for their animals sometimes made desperate choices, leaving them to fend for themselves in the wilderness. "I'll be there in 20, Jacob replied, already reaching for his worn leather boots. He called out to his son, Mason, who at 25 had inherited his father's quiet strength and love for animals. Together they loaded the horse trailer and set off down the dusty road, the sun now fully risen, burning away the morning mist. When they arrived, they found Mark, Jacob's neighbor, standing at a respectful distance from a pale golden mare lying in the tall grass. Even from afar, Jacob could see the poor condition of the animal, her ribs visible beneath her dull coat, her eyes wary and distrustful. But what struck him most was her posture, protective, almost defensive, as if she was guarding something beneath her body. "She's been like that since I found her," Mark explained, his voice low. "Won't budge, won't let anyone close. I tried offering water, but she just gets agitated." Jacob nodded silently, assessing the situation with experienced eyes. Years of working with horses had taught him to read their behavior, to understand their fears and needs. This mare was afraid, yes, but there was something else, a fierce determination that shone in her eyes. "Let me try," Mason said, already reaching for the lead rope and a canteen of water. His father nodded, knowing his son's gentle way with animals often succeeded where others failed. Mason approached slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He spoke in a soft, even tone, a continuous stream of reassuring words that seemed to float on the morning breeze. "Hey there, girl, it's all right. No one's gonna hurt you. I just want to help. That's it. Easy now." The mare's ears flicked forward, her eyes tracking Mason's every move. When he was about 10 feet away, she snorted a warning, her body tensing. Mason stopped immediately, respecting her boundary. "Something's not right, Dad," he called back, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think she's protecting something." Jacob and Mark exchanged glances, both men moving forward with cautious steps to get a better view. As they shifted their position, the angle changed, and for the first time, they caught a glimpse of what lay beneath the mare's protective stance. A tiny foal, its coat the same golden hue as its mother's, lay curled against her belly, so small and still that it had been completely hidden from view. The mare's body was positioned in such a way that she formed a living barrier between her baby and the perceived threat of humans. "She has a foal," Jacob breathed, a mixture of concern and understanding washing over him. The mare's behavior made perfect sense now, her refusal to move, her defensive posture. She wasn't just afraid for herself, she was protecting her newborn. "The foal doesn't look right," Mason observed, his brow furrowed. "It's too still." Jacob felt a weight settle in his chest. He'd seen enough births on the ranch to know when something was wrong. If the foal was struggling to survive, they needed to act quickly, but first, they needed to gain the mare's trust. "Call Dr. Reyes," Jacob instructed Mark, referring to the local veterinarian. "Tell her it's an emergency." As Mark retreated to make the call, Jacob joined his son, maintaining a respectful distance from the mare. "We need to approach this carefully," he said. "She's already stressed and weak. If that foal needs help, we've got to convince her we're not a threat." Mason nodded, already formulating a plan. With slow, deliberate movements, he sank to his knees in the grass, making himself smaller, less intimidating. Then he began to sing, a low, gentle melody that his mother used to sing around the horses when he was a child. The tune carried across the field, its simplicity somehow soothing in the tense atmosphere. To Jacob's amazement, the mare's ears perked up, her eyes fixed on Mason. The singing seemed to calm her, or at least intrigue her enough to momentarily forget her fear. "Keep going," Jacob encouraged his son, as he too lowered himself to the ground, following Mason's example. For nearly an hour they stayed that way, Mason singing softly, occasionally pausing to speak gentle reassurances to the mare. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the distance between them shortened. The mare's posture remained protective, but the wild fear in her eyes began to subside, replaced by a wary acceptance. By the time Dr. Reyes arrived, Mason had managed to move within arm's reach of the mare. The veterinarian, a practical woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, assessed the situation quickly. "The foal is alive, but barely," she confirmed after observing from a distance. "We need to examine both of them, and the mare needs fluids and nutrition immediately." "She won't leave her baby," Jacob said, stating what they all knew. Dr. Reyes nodded thoughtfully. "Then we treat them both here, in the field. If we can stabilize them, we'll think about transport later." What followed was a delicate dance of trust and necessity. With Mason continuing his gentle approach, they managed to offer the mare water, which she finally accepted, drinking deeply despite her obvious fear. Dr. Reyes prepared a mild sedative, enough to keep the mare calm without endangering her weakened state or the foal. As the sedative took effect, the mare's vigilance wavered just enough for them to finally see what she had been so desperately protecting. The foal was indeed alive, but terribly weak, its breathing shallow and labored. It showed signs of premature birth, smaller than it should be, with spindly legs and a coat that seemed too thin for the morning chill. "She gave birth out here alone," Dr. Reyes murmured, her experienced hands gently examining the tiny creature. "And from the looks of it, she's been protecting it for at least a day, maybe longer. No food, little water, just keeping her baby alive through sheer will." Jacob felt a lump form in his throat. He'd seen many things in his decades of ranching, but the sight of this weakened mare, abandoned and alone, fighting so desperately to protect her newborn, struck him deeply. What kind of person would abandon a pregnant mare, leaving her to give birth alone in the wilderness? The question hung unspoken in the air as they worked together to save 2 lives that morning under the vast open sky of Willow Creek. As the morning stretched into afternoon, the small group worked tirelessly in the field. Dr. Reyes had set up a makeshift treatment area, her medical supplies spread on a clean tarp beside the mare. Mason remained by the horse's head, his hand gently stroking her neck, his voice a constant reassuring presence. The mare's eyes, though heavy-lidded from the sedative, never left her foal, even as Dr. Reyes carefully examined the tiny creature. "She's severely malnourished and dehydrated," the vet announced, her hands moving expertly over the mare's body. "And there are signs of neglect going back months, not just days. Look at these old wounds on her flanks. They weren't treated properly." Jacob's jaw tightened as he observed the scars partially hidden beneath the mare's dull coat. Someone had not only abandoned this horse but had mistreated her before that. The thought kindled a slow-burning anger in his chest. "What about the foal?" he asked, pushing aside his anger to focus on the immediate concern. Dr. Reyes's expression grew somber. "It's touch and go. Premature, as I suspected. The fact that it's survived this long is remarkable, honestly. The mare has been keeping it warm and protected, but it needs colostrum, and I'm worried the mare's milk might not be sufficient given her condition." She reached into her medical bag and produced several bottles and syringes. "I've brought colostrum supplement and some nutrients we can administer, but this little one would really benefit from proper facilities, an incubator if possible. Closest equine hospital is 3 hours away," Mark pointed out, his weathered face creased with concern. He had remained to help, bringing additional water and blankets from his house. "My barn," Jacob decided quickly. "It's not a hospital, but it's clean, warm, and only 20 minutes from here. We've helped deliver foals before, got heat lamps and everything." Dr. Reyes nodded, her attention never wavering from her patients. "If we can stabilize them both enough for transport, that's our best option. The foal needs consistent warmth and care, and the mare needs proper nutrition and rest." They worked methodically, Dr. Reyes administering fluids to the mare through an IV while Mason helped her feed the foal small amounts of colostrum supplement. The tiny creature accepted the nourishment weakly, but each successful swallow felt like a victory. "What do you think happened?" Mason asked quietly, his eyes on the mare's face. Despite her exhaustion and the sedative, there remained a dignity in her expression, a quiet strength that spoke of her fight to survive and protect her baby. Jacob shook his head. "Hard to say for certain. No brand that I can see, though that doesn't mean much these days. Could be someone who couldn't afford to keep her anymore, especially with a foal coming. Or someone who never should have had horses in the first place," Dr. Reyes added, her voice carrying an edge of professional indignation. "She's young, probably just had her first foal, but these old injuries, someone knew she was hurt and didn't care." The thought hung heavy in the air. The countryside had seen an increase in horse abandonments in recent years. The economic pressures, combined with the drought that had ravaged grazing lands and sent hay prices soaring, had pushed many owners to desperate measures. Still, abandoning a pregnant mare seemed particularly cruel. As the afternoon wore on, the mare began to show signs of improvement. The fluids had helped combat her dehydration, and she accepted small amounts of the special feed Dr. Reyes had brought. The foal, too, seemed marginally stronger after several feedings of the colostrum supplement, though its condition remained precarious. "I think we can risk moving them now," Dr. Reyes finally announced, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. The summer sun had climbed high, beating down on them as they worked. "The mare's stable enough, and the foal can't stay out here another night." The next challenge was getting both animals safely into the trailer. The mare, though weakened, might still panic if separated from her foal, and the stress could undo all their careful work. "We'll need to move them together," Jacob decided. "Mason, bring the trailer as close as you can. Mark, let's fashion a kind of sling for the foal, something secure but gentle that we can use to carry it alongside the mare." Using blankets from Mark's house and some rope from the truck, they created a makeshift sling that would allow them to carry the foal while keeping it visible to its mother. Dr. Reyes administered another mild sedative to the mare, just enough to keep her calm during transport without endangering her recovery. "Easy now, girl," Mason murmured as they finally helped the mare to her feet. She stood shakily, her legs trembling with the effort after lying down for so long. Her eyes immediately sought her foal, and she nickered softly when she saw Mason and Dr. Reyes carefully lifting the tiny creature in the blanket sling. With patience and gentle encouragement, they guided the mare toward the trailer, keeping the foal close enough for her to see and smell. The loading was slow and tense, each step carefully calculated to minimize stress on both animals. When at last the mare stood in the trailer, they positioned the foal beside her, removing it from the sling but ensuring it remained safely nestled against its mother. "I'll follow you back to the ranch," Dr. Reyes said, packing her supplies. "This is just the beginning. They've both got a long road ahead." As they drove slowly back to Willow Creek Ranch, Jacob couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn the day had taken. What had started as a routine call about an abandoned horse had become a fight for two lives, lives that now, for better or worse, were intertwined with his own. Back at the ranch, preparations were already underway. Jacob had called ahead to his daughter Emma, who had set up a large stall with fresh bedding, heat lamps, and all the necessary supplies Dr. Reyes had requested. At 22, Emma was studying veterinary medicine herself and had inherited her father's affinity for horses, combined with her mother's meticulous attention to detail. When they arrived, Emma was waiting, her face serious as she helped guide the mare into the prepared stall. The foal, still too weak to stand, was carried in and placed gently on the soft bedding. The mare immediately positioned herself protectively beside her baby, her body forming the same sheltering curve they had first observed in the field. "What are we going to call them?" Emma asked, her voice soft as she observed the pair. Jacob hadn't thought about names yet. Their survival had been the only priority. But as he watched the golden mare, still vigilant despite her exhaustion, still committed to protecting her foal against all odds, a name came to him. "Hope," he said simply. "The mare's name is Hope." Emma smiled, understanding immediately. "And the little one?" Mason, who had been quietly ensuring the water and feed were properly set up, looked over at the tiny foal struggling to survive against overwhelming odds. "Miracle," he suggested, "because that's what it'll be if this little fighter pulls through." As the family stood watching the mare and her foal settle into their new sanctuary, the gravity of the commitment they had just made settled over them. These horses would need weeks, perhaps months of intensive care. There would be veterinary bills, special feed, and countless hours of attention and monitoring. But looking at Hope and her tiny foal, none of those concerns seemed to matter. Some things transcended practical considerations. Some things simply needed to be done because they were right. Night fell over Willow Creek Ranch, but there was little rest for the Thompson family. They had established a rotation. Someone would be with Hope and Miracle at all times. The first watch fell to Emma, who settled on a bale of hay just outside the stall, a veterinary textbook open on her lap, and a thermos of coffee by her side. Dr. Reyes had left detailed instructions before departing, promising to return first thing in the morning. The next 24 hours would be critical, especially for the foal. Emma watched Miracle closely, monitoring his breathing and making notes of any changes, however slight. Every 2 hours, she would help the foal nurse, supporting his wobbly head as he sought his mother's milk, supplementing with the formula Dr. Reyes had provided when necessary. Hope remained vigilant despite her exhaustion, her eyes following Emma's every movement with wary attention. Trust would take time to build, Emma knew, but she spoke softly to the mare anyway, explaining each action before she took it, moving slowly and deliberately around the stall. "You're safe now," she murmured as she checked the foal's temperature. "Both of you. We're going to help you get strong again." Around midnight, Mason came to relieve his sister. Emma handed over her notes and the feeding schedule, her face drawn with fatigue but her eyes bright with determination. "Miracle took the supplement well last time," she reported, "and his temperature is stabilized. Hope still won't eat much, though. She's too focused on watching us." Mason nodded, taking his place on the hay bale. "Get some rest. I've got this." As Emma departed, Mason settled in for his watch. Unlike his sister, who approached the situation with scientific precision, Mason relied on instinct and patience. He didn't try to interact with the horses immediately. Instead, he simply sat, occasionally humming the same tune he had used in the field, letting Hope grow accustomed to his presence. After about an hour, he noticed the mare's eyelids beginning to droop. Her exhaustion was finally overcoming her vigilance. Mason continued humming, the soft melody filling the quiet barn with a gentle reassurance. Eventually, Hope's head lowered and she drifted into what appeared to be her first real sleep since they had found her. Even in sleep, her body remained curved protectively around her foal. Mason watched, moved by the depth of the mare's dedication. What she had endured to protect her baby, the hunger, the exposure, the fear, spoke of a love that transcended species, a fundamental maternal instinct that connected all living creatures. When it came time for Miracle's feeding, Mason approached with extreme caution, not wanting to startle Hope from her much-needed rest. But as if sensing his intentions, the mare's eyes opened the moment he neared the foal. There was no panic this time, however, just a watchful awareness. "Just helping him eat," Mason explained softly, showing her the bottle of supplement. "You rest. I'll take care of him for a bit." To his surprise, Hope didn't attempt to rise. She watched intently as he gently supported Miracle, helping the foal take the nourishment he needed. It wasn't trust yet, Mason knew, but it was a beginning, an exhausted acceptance born of necessity. Jacob took the pre-dawn shift, arriving to find his son dozing on the hay bale while Hope and Miracle slept. The mare opened her eyes at his entrance but seemed less alarmed than before. Progress, however small, was still progress. "Any changes?" Jacob asked in a hushed voice as Mason roused himself. "She let me feed him without getting up," Mason reported with quiet satisfaction, "and she's been drinking water regularly. Emma's notes say his temperature is holding steady." Jacob nodded, his weather-worn face softening as he looked at the pair. "Go get some sleep, son. I'll take it from here." Alone with the horses, Jacob pulled up a stool and sat with his morning coffee, watching as the first pale light of dawn filtered through the barn windows. In the growing illumination, he studied Hope more carefully than he had been able to in the chaotic moments of rescue. She was younger than he had initially thought, perhaps only 4 or 5 years old. Despite her current state, he could see that she had good conformation, a refined head, and the potential for beauty once proper care restored her health. She wasn't just some random grade horse. Someone had paid good money for her once. His thoughts were interrupted when Hope suddenly lifted her head, her ears pricked forward in alarm. A moment later, Jacob heard what had disturbed her, the sound of a vehicle coming up the long driveway to the ranch house. "It's all right," he assured her, recognizing the familiar rumble of Dr. Reyes's truck. "That's just the doc coming to check on you two." Dr. Reyes arrived carrying additional medical supplies and a determined expression. After greeting Jacob, she moved straight to examining the foal, her practiced hands gentle but thorough. "He made it through the night," she observed, genuine surprise in her voice. "That's more than I dared hope for, to be honest." "He's a fighter," Jacob agreed. "Takes after his mama." The vet moved on to examine Hope, noting with approval that the mare was allowing the examination with far less resistance than the previous day. "The fluids have helped, and she's starting to hydrate properly," Dr. Reyes reported, "but she's still severely underweight. We need to get more calories into her, especially if she's going to produce enough milk for this little one." Jacob nodded, already planning the special feeding regimen they would implement. "What about Miracle? Is he strong enough yet?" Dr. Reyes's expression grew more guarded. "He's stable, which is remarkable given the circumstances. But he's not out of danger, Jacob. Premature foals face numerous challenges. Their lungs aren't fully developed. Their immune systems are compromised and they're at higher risk for infections and developmental issues. But he has a chance. A better one than yesterday, she confirmed. Every hour he survives increases his odds. The fact that he's maintaining his body temperature with the help of the heat lamps and his mother's body heat is a positive sign. As they discussed treatment options, Emma arrived with breakfast for her father and the vet, as well as the special feed mix they had prepared for Hope. "I've been doing some research," she announced, setting down the tray of food, "about abandoned horses and how to track their origins." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I think we should check for a microchip," Emma suggested. "It's becoming more common, and if Hope came from a reputable breeder or was ever registered, she might have one." Dr. Reyes nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. I have a scanner in my truck. We can check right after breakfast." While they ate, Emma shared what else she had learned. There have been reports of abandoned horses in 3 neighboring counties in the past 6 months. Most were older animals or those with health issues, but a local rescue group has been documenting them, trying to identify patterns. "You think Hope might be connected to those cases?" Jacob asked, his interest piqued. "I don't know," Emma admitted. "But if she is, it might help us understand where she came from and what happened to her. The more we know about her history, the better we can address her specific needs." After breakfast, Dr. Reyes retrieved the microchip scanner from her vehicle. Hope remained calm as the vet ran the device over her neck and shoulders, the most common locations for equine microchips. The scanner beeped, its small screen displaying a sequence of numbers. "She's chipped," Dr. Reyes confirmed, looking up with surprise. "Which means she has a documented history somewhere." The discovery added another layer to the mystery of Hope's abandonment. This wasn't a case of an unwanted, undocumented horse. Hope had been valuable enough to someone, at some point, to warrant proper registration. "Can we trace it?" Mason asked, having returned to the barn after a few hours of sleep. Dr. Reyes nodded. "I'll make some calls. The chip should be registered in a database with owner information." Jacob felt a strange mix of emotions at this development. On one hand, identifying Hope's origins might help them understand her needs better and possibly hold someone accountable for her abandonment. On the other hand, it opened the possibility that someone might claim her, someone who had already proven themselves unworthy of her care. While Dr. Reyes made calls about the microchip, the Thompson family focused on the immediate needs of their charges. By mid-morning, Hope had begun to show more interest in the special feed Emma had prepared, a nutrient-rich blend designed to help nursing mares regain their strength. It was a small victory, but they celebrated it nonetheless. Miracle remained a constant concern. Though he had survived the night, his breathing sometimes grew labored, and his attempts to stand were weak and uncoordinated. Normal foals typically stood within an hour of birth. Miracle, premature and weakened, couldn't manage more than a few seconds before collapsing back to the bedding. "Come on, little guy," Mason encouraged as he supported the foal's frail body during another attempt. Hope watched attentively, nickering softly as if offering her own encouragement. "Your mama wants to see you up and about." The foal's spindly legs trembled with effort, his determination evident despite his weakness. For a brief, shining moment, he stood unassisted, swaying precariously before gravity reclaimed him. Mason caught him gently, easing him back down beside Hope. "Did you see that?" he called to Emma, who was mixing another batch of supplement nearby. He stood on his own for a few seconds. Emma hurried over, her face breaking into a smile. "That's huge progress. His muscles are developing." She knelt to examine the foal more closely. "And his eyes look brighter today. I think the treatments are starting to work." Their cautious optimism was interrupted when Dr. Reyes returned to the barn, her expression unreadable. "I've got information on the microchip," she announced, joining them by the stall. The mare is registered as Golden Opportunity, a quarter horse with impressive bloodlines. She was sold at the Lexington auction 2 years ago to a buyer named Carter Davidson. Davidson? Jacob frowned, the name triggering a vague recollection. Sounds familiar. It should, Dr. Reyes confirmed grimly. He's the one who bought that property on the north side of the county about 18 months ago. Had big plans to start a horse breeding operation. There were some rumors about how he treated his stock, but nothing concrete enough for authorities to act on. Jacob's expression darkened. I remember now. Showed up with fancy trucks and big talk about championship bloodlines. Then he disappeared about 6 months ago. Word was he'd run into financial trouble. That tracks with what I just learned, Dr. Reyes said. The property's been foreclosed on by the bank. Davidson apparently took his most valuable horses and disappeared, leaving behind the ones he couldn't sell quickly or didn't think were worth taking. He just abandoned them? Emma's voice rose with indignation. According to my contact at Animal Control, they found 3 other horses on the property when they were finally called in. All were malnourished, though not as badly as Hope. They've been placed with rescue organizations. But Hope wasn't among them, Mason observed. She must have escaped somehow. Dr. Reyes nodded. That's my guess too. Maybe she sensed the birth coming and found a way out, seeking a safer place. Maternal instinct is powerful. So what happens now? Jacob asked, the practical rancher in him needing to understand the legal situation. Does Davidson still have a claim on her? Technically, he remains the registered owner, Dr. Reyes admitted. But he's also facing potential animal cruelty charges if they can find him. Animal Control has been trying to locate him for weeks without success. So he abandons her, leaves her to die, and could still come back and take her? Emma's outrage was palpable. That's not right. It's complicated, the vet acknowledged. But given the circumstances, I doubt he'll show up to claim her. That would mean facing those cruelty charges. And if he doesn't respond to the official notices Animal Control will be sending, there's a process to legally consider the horses abandoned, making them eligible for adoption. The family fell silent, absorbing this information. Hope, oblivious to the discussion about her fate, had returned her attention to Miracle, gently nuzzling his small form as he dozed. We should document everything, Emma finally said, her voice firm with resolve. Her condition when we found her, all the medical treatments, the foal's premature state, everything. If there ever is a dispute about her ownership, we'll need to show exactly what Davidson did by abandoning her. Jacob nodded in agreement. Dr. Reyes, could you provide official documentation of their medical condition? Already started the paperwork, she assured him. And I'll contact Animal Control to make sure Hope and Miracle are added to the official case against Davidson. The conversation was interrupted by a soft whicker from Hope. They turned to see Miracle attempting to stand once more, his determined spirit seemingly undaunted by previous failures. This time, when he gained his feet, he managed to stay up a few seconds longer before nestling back against his mother. Well, look at that, Jacob said softly. He's not giving up. Neither should we, Mason replied. For the next several days, life at Willow Creek Ranch revolved around the care of Hope and Miracle. The family maintained their round-the-clock watch, monitoring every small change in the pair's condition. Dr. Reyes visited daily, her initial pessimism gradually giving way to cautious optimism as Miracle continued to defy the odds. By the end of the first week, Hope had begun to put on weight, her dull coat showing the first hints of its natural luster returning. More importantly, she was producing better quality milk, which meant Miracle relied less on supplements and more on his mother's nourishment, a critical factor in his development. The foal's progress, while slower, was equally encouraging. His periods of standing grew longer each day, and he had begun to take a few tentative steps, always under the watchful eyes of both Hope and whichever Thompson happened to be on duty. Word of the rescued mare and her miracle foal spread through the local community. Neighbors stopped by with offerings, special feeds, hand-knitted foal blankets, and words of encouragement. In a rural area where many were struggling with their own hardships, the story of Hope and Miracle's fight for survival had struck a chord. One afternoon, as Jacob was replacing the bedding in the stall, he noticed something that gave him pause. Hope, who had maintained her protective stance over Miracle even as her health improved, had shifted her position. For the first time, she was allowing the foal more independence, watching from a slight distance as he practiced his wobbly steps around the stall. "Well, would you look at that?" Jacob murmured to Emma, who was updating the medical chart nearby. Emma glanced up, immediately understanding the significance. "She's starting to feel safe," she observed. "Safe enough to let him explore a little." It was a small change, but a profound one. Hope's constant vigilance, her need to physically shield her foal from potential threats, had been born of trauma and necessity. This subtle relaxation of her guard spoke volumes about her gradual acceptance of her new circumstances. Later that evening, when the family gathered for dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to the horses. "Animal control called today," Jacob informed them, passing a bowl of potatoes to Mason. "They've officially added Hope to the Davidson case. They also said none of the other horses were pregnant, which explains why he might have abandoned her first, saw her as a liability rather than an asset." "Someone who sees a pregnant mare as a liability doesn't deserve to own horses in the first place," Emma said firmly, the protectiveness she felt toward Hope evident in her voice. "No argument there," her father agreed, "but their legal process takes time. It could be months before Hope's status is fully resolved." Mason, who had been quieter than usual, finally spoke up. "I've been thinking, what if we officially apply to adopt her? Once she's legally available, I mean." The question hung in the air, giving voice to what they had all been considering but hadn't yet discussed openly. Taking on 2 horses permanently was no small commitment, especially given Miracle's potential for long-term health issues. Jacob looked at his son thoughtfully, considering the question that had now been voiced aloud. The financial implications were significant: veterinary bills, feed costs, potential complications with Miracle's health. But as he glanced around the table at his family's faces, he knew the decision had already been made in their hearts. "I think," he said slowly, "that Hope and Miracle found their way to us for a reason. If they become available for adoption, we'll make it official." Emma's face lit up with a smile, while Mason nodded, his usual reserved expression softening with relief. "We should be prepared, though," Jacob continued, ever the practical one. "Miracle might have special needs long-term. Premature foals sometimes develop issues that don't show up right away." "We'll handle whatever comes," Emma asserted confidently. "I've been researching developmental care for premature foals. There are exercises we can do to help strengthen his legs, special nutrition plans, and he has all of us," Mason added quietly. "Between the 3 of us and Dr. Reyes, he'll get the best care possible." The decision made, they finished dinner with a renewed sense of purpose. What had begun as an emergency rescue was evolving into a long-term commitment, a new chapter for both the horses and the Thompson family. The following morning brought unexpected visitors to Willow Creek Ranch. Jacob was in the barn checking on Hope and Miracle when he heard the sound of a vehicle coming up the drive. Stepping outside, he saw an unfamiliar pickup truck with county markings pull up beside the house. 2 people emerged, a tall, stern-looking woman in a county uniform and a younger man carrying a camera. Jacob approached them, wiping his hands on a towel. "Can I help you folks?" he asked. The woman extended her hand. Diane Mercer, County Animal Control. This is my colleague, Jeff. Dr. Reyes informed us about the abandoned mare and foal you're caring for. We need to document their condition for our case file. Jacob shook her hand, recognizing the name from his conversations with Dr. Reyes. Of course, they're in the barn. The foal's doing better, but he's still weak. As he led them toward the barn, he explained the circumstances of finding Hope and the subsequent discovery of her microchip and connection to Davidson. We've been trying to build a case against Davidson for months, Diane explained, her professional demeanor momentarily slipping to reveal frustration. But he kept moving his operation, and we could never catch him with enough evidence of neglect to make charges stick. What about the horses found on his foreclosed property? Jacob asked. That's given us our strongest case yet, she confirmed. But having documentation of this mare's condition, especially a pregnant mare abandoned to fend for herself, could be crucial. This goes beyond neglect into outright cruelty. Inside the barn, Hope watched the newcomers with wary eyes, positioning herself between them and Miracle, who was dozing in the straw. Though she no longer constantly shielded him with her body, her protective instincts remained strong around strangers. She's still very protective, Jacob explained. Given what she's been through, we're not pushing her to accept new people too quickly. Diane nodded, maintaining a respectful distance as she observed the mare. Her condition is consistent with the other Davidson horses we found, the weight loss pattern, the untreated wounds. Jeff, get photos, but don't use the flash. The young man began carefully documenting Hope and Miracle from different angles, while Diane made notes on a tablet. Jacob watched silently, feeling a mixture of sadness and anger as their professional assessment confirmed what he already knew. These horses had suffered unnecessarily at human hands. The foal is premature, Diane asked, noting Miracle's small size. Yes, Dr. Reyes believes Hope went into early labor due to stress and malnutrition. It's a miracle he survived at all. As they continued their documentation, Emma arrived, carrying fresh water for the horses. Jacob introduced her to the animal control officers, and she immediately offered additional information. I've been keeping detailed records of their care and progress, she told Diane, retrieving a binder from a nearby shelf. There are daily weight measurements, notes on their feeding, medications administered, everything Dr. Reyes recommended we track. Diane appeared impressed as she flipped through the meticulous records. This is excellent, much more detailed than we usually get. Are you in veterinary medicine? Studying to be, Emma confirmed. Second year at the State University. I'm home for the summer. Well, your documentation will be extremely helpful for our case, Diane said, returning the binder. We'll need copies of these records if you don't mind. Of course, Emma agreed readily. Anything that helps hold Davidson accountable. After completing their documentation, Diane explained the next steps in the legal process. We're still trying to locate Davidson. He has 30 days to respond to our notices before the horses can be legally declared abandoned. Given the evidence of neglect and cruelty, however, we're also pursuing a separate track to have his ownership rights terminated immediately on welfare grounds. And if you succeed, Jacob asked, then the horses would become available for adoption much sooner, she explained. Given the excellent care you're providing, you would certainly be considered ideal adoptive owners if you're interested. We are, Jacob confirmed without hesitation. Very interested. As the animal control officers prepared to leave, Diane paused, her official demeanor softening slightly. For what it's worth, Mr. Thompson, what you and your family have done for these horses, especially that foal, it's exceptional. Not everyone would have gone to these lengths. Jacob shrugged modestly. We did what needed doing. Anyone would have. No, Diane replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many cases of animal neglect and too few of genuine compassion. Not everyone would have, believe me. After they departed, Emma and Jacob returned to the barn, where Hope had relaxed once more, allowing Miracle to nurse. The foal's nursing sessions had grown stronger in recent days, another positive sign of his improving health. "She's right, you know," Emma said, breaking the comfortable silence as they watched the pair. "Not everyone would have done what we did, what we're doing." Jacob remained silent, uncomfortable with praise for what he considered simply the right thing to do. "Remember the Hendersons last year?" Emma continued. "They found that injured gelding on their property and just called animal control to take it away. They didn't even offer temporary shelter while waiting for pickup." "Different circumstances," Jacob murmured, though he had been disappointed by the Hendersons' actions at the time. "Different choices," Emma corrected gently. Their conversation was interrupted by Mason's arrival. He had been repairing fences in the east pasture, but had returned early, his expression unusually animated. "You won't believe who I just saw driving slowly past our south boundary," he announced without preamble. "A black truck with 2 men inside. One of them was taking pictures of the property." Jacob frowned. "Did you recognize them?" "No, but they definitely weren't from around here. Brand new truck, city plates. When they saw me watching, they sped off." Emma's eyes widened with sudden concern. "You don't think, could it be Davidson? Maybe he heard somehow that Hope is here." Jacob's expression grew grim. The thought had occurred to him as well. Could be coincidence. Lots of new people looking at rural properties these days. But even as he said it, a sense of unease settled over him. The timing was suspicious, just after Animal Control's visit, just as the legal case against Davidson was building. "I'll call Sheriff Miller," he decided. "Ask him to keep an eye out for any unfamiliar vehicles in the area. And from now on, we keep the barn doors closed and locked when we're not in there." As they implemented these new security measures, Hope seemed to sense their concern. She nickered softly to Miracle, drawing him closer to her side, her maternal vigilance mirroring their own protective instincts. The sighting of the mysterious truck cast a shadow over the peaceful routine that had developed at Willow Creek Ranch. Sheriff Miller had promised to increase patrols in the area, but with limited resources and miles of rural roads to cover, Jacob knew they couldn't rely solely on official protection. The family implemented their own security measures, keeping the barn doors locked, installing motion sensor lights, and making sure someone was always within earshot of the stables. Despite these new concerns, Hope and Miracle continued to make progress. The foal, now 2 weeks old, had developed a stronger stance and could walk short distances without faltering. His coat was beginning to fill out, taking on the same golden hue as his mother's, and his curious personality emerged more each day. "Look at him," Emma said one morning, watching as Miracle pranced awkwardly around Hope, his spindly legs executing an endearing approximation of a canter. "He's trying to show off." Mason, who was preparing for the day's farm work, paused to observe the foal's antics. "Hard to believe he's the same foal we found barely breathing 2 weeks ago." Hope, though still protective, had begun to allow the Thompsons closer access to Miracle. She recognized them now as allies rather than threats, accepting their presence with growing trust. Dr. Reyes had declared herself cautiously amazed at the progress of both mother and foal during her most recent visit. "Medically speaking, that foal shouldn't be thriving the way he is," she had admitted, "but sometimes they just have a will to live that defies explanation." The peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Jacob stepped to the barn door, tension immediately visible in his shoulders. He relaxed slightly when he recognized Diane Mercer's county vehicle. "Morning," she greeted him, climbing out with a folder tucked under her arm. Her usual stern expression seemed even more pronounced today. "Got some updates on the Davidson situation. Thought you should hear it directly from me." Jacob led her into the house, where Emma was preparing breakfast. Mason joined them, wiping his hands on a towel as he came in from the barn. "Coffee?" Emma offered, already reaching for an extra mug. "Please," Diane accepted, settling at the kitchen table. She waited until they were all seated before opening her folder. "We've located Davidson." The simple statement landed with the weight of a stone in still water. Jacob leaned forward, his weathered hands flat on the table. "Where?" "He's in Arizona, apparently trying to start over with the horses he took when he left here. One of his former employees recognized him from our bulletin and called it in to local authorities." "So what happens now?" Emma asked, her voice tight with concern. Diane sighed. "It's complicated. He's been served with formal notice about the abandoned horses, including Hope. As expected, he's denying any wrongdoing, claiming the horses must have been stolen or escaped." "That's ridiculous," Mason said, his usual calm demeanor slipping. "The condition they were found in shows long-term neglect, not a recent escape." "We know that," Diane assured him. "The medical evidence is solid, but Davidson has hired an attorney who's arguing that the horses were in perfect health when they supposedly disappeared from his property, and any neglect happened after that, not before." Jacob's expression darkened. "So he's not only cruel but a liar too." "Unfortunately, this means the legal process will take longer than we hoped," Diane continued. "His attorney is challenging our petition to terminate his ownership rights on welfare grounds." "What about the foal?" Emma asked. "Miracle isn't even in any of Davidson's records. He was born after Hope was abandoned." Diane nodded. "That's actually our strongest point. Davidson claims he didn't know the mare was pregnant, which undermines his claim of providing proper care. No responsible horse owner fails to notice a pregnancy." "So where does this leave us?" Jacob asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "For now, Hope and Miracle stay with you as foster care. The judge has issued a temporary order preventing Davidson from removing any of the horses involved in the case until it's resolved." She paused, her expression grave. "But there's something else you should know." Davidson mentioned to the Arizona authorities that he believes one of his stolen horses is being kept at Willow Creek Ranch. The implication was clear. Davidson knew where Hope was. "How would he know that?" Mason asked, his voice tight with anger. "That's what concerns me," Diane admitted. "Someone must have told him, and given the timing." "The men in the truck," Jacob concluded grimly. "Taking pictures." Diane nodded. "Possibly. Which is why I wanted to warn you personally. Davidson can't legally take Hope while the case is pending, but that doesn't mean he won't try something. People who abuse animals often don't have much respect for the law either." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen as the family absorbed this troubling development. Emma was the first to speak, her voice steady despite the worry evident in her eyes. "What can we do to protect them?" "Legally, you're already doing everything right," Diane assured them. "Keep maintaining those detailed records. I've notified the sheriff about the situation as well." She hesitated, then added more personally, "Off the record, I wouldn't leave those horses unattended, not even for a few hours." After Diane left, the family gathered in the barn, the conversation muted as they processed the news. Hope seemed to sense their concern, watching them with alert eyes as she hovered near Miracle. "We'll need to adjust our schedules," Jacob decided. "Make sure someone's here round the clock again, just like when we first brought them home." "I can sleep in the tack room," Mason offered immediately. "It wouldn't be the first time." Emma nodded. "And I can rearrange my summer research schedule to be here during the day while you two handle the ranch work." Jacob looked at his children with pride. Despite the potential danger and inconvenience, neither had hesitated to do what was necessary to protect the horses that had become part of their family. "Let's also call some neighbors," he suggested. Let them know to keep an eye out for any suspicious vehicles or strangers asking about horses. In rural communities like theirs, neighbors looked out for each other, an informal security network born of shared values and physical isolation. Jacob had no doubt they would rally to help once they understood the situation. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, Jacob stood at the paddock fence watching Hope and Miracle. They had started allowing the pair outside for short periods, the fresh air and gentle exercise beneficial for both. Miracle was exploring his expanded world with characteristic curiosity, investigating clumps of grass and occasionally breaking into awkward little bursts of speed that made Jacob smile despite his concerns. Hope grazed nearby, always attentive to her foal's whereabouts, occasionally nickering softly, as if to reassure herself of his presence. The sight of them, thriving despite everything they had endured, strengthened Jacob's resolve. They had fought too hard to survive, come too far in their recovery, to be returned to someone who had discarded them so callously. Whatever it took, he would ensure they remained safe. As if sensing his thoughts, Hope raised her head and looked directly at him, her gaze steady and trusting. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a shared determination to protect what mattered most. The peaceful scene was interrupted by the distant sound of a vehicle on the main road. Jacob tensed instinctively, his hand moving to the fence post. But the vehicle continued past without slowing, its engine noise fading into the gathering dusk. Just a passing car, he told himself, but the moment of alarm served as a reminder of their new reality. Vigilance would be their watchword now, the price of keeping Hope and Miracle safe from the man who had abandoned them to die. A week passed with no further sightings of suspicious vehicles. The heightened security measures became part of the daily routine at Willow Creek Ranch. Barn doors secured, regular checks throughout the night, neighbors calling to report any unfamiliar cars on the rural roads. The constant vigilance was exhausting but necessary. Miracle continued to flourish despite the tense atmosphere. At 3 weeks old, he had developed a playful personality that brought smiles to everyone who saw him. His coordination improved daily, and he had begun to exhibit short bursts of what Dr. Reyes called zoomies, spontaneous gallops around the paddock that ended as abruptly as they began, usually with the foal looking surprised at his own athleticism. Hope, too, showed remarkable progress. Her ribs were no longer visible beneath her coat, which had regained its lustrous golden sheen. The old wounds on her flanks had healed, leaving only faint scars as reminders of her past mistreatment. Most significantly, she had begun to display behaviors typical of a healthy, content horse, rolling in the paddock dust, dozing in the afternoon sun, and even playing gentle games of tag with her increasingly energetic foal. "She's becoming the horse she was meant to be," Emma observed one afternoon as she and Mason watched the pair from the fence. Mason nodded, his normally serious face softened by a rare smile. "Remember how she wouldn't let anyone near Miracle those first few days? Now look at them." As if to illustrate his point, Miracle trotted over to where they stood, his curiosity overcoming any lingering wariness. Hope watched from a short distance, alert but no longer anxious as her foal investigated the humans who had become part of their daily lives. Emma reached out slowly, allowing the foal to sniff her hand before gently stroking his velvety muzzle. "Hey there, little miracle worker," she murmured affectionately. The foal leaned into her touch, his large eyes half closing with pleasure. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of Jacob's truck returning from town. As he parked and approached the paddock, his expression told them something was wrong even before he spoke. "We need to talk," he said simply, gesturing toward the house. Once inside, Jacob spread several papers on the kitchen table. "Davidson's attorney filed these today. I got copies from Diane." Emma picked up the top document, her face darkening as she read. He's demanding immediate return of his property, meaning Hope. This is outrageous. After everything he did? He claims there's no proof he abandoned her, Jacob explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. Says she must have been stolen from his property by someone who then neglected her before she ended up with us. That's absurd, Mason said. The timeline doesn't work. Dr. Reyes documented that Hope's condition indicated weeks, if not months, of neglect. And what about the other horses found on his property? His attorney is arguing those horses weren't his either, that someone must have placed them there after he left to frame him. Jacob's tone made it clear what he thought of this defense. Emma set the paper down, her hands trembling slightly with indignation. No judge would believe this, right? The evidence is overwhelming. Diane says the judge seems skeptical of his claims, but has to follow proper procedure, Jacob replied. There's a hearing scheduled for next week. We're all being called to testify about Hope's condition when we found her. And Miracle? Mason asked. What's Davidson saying about him? That's the strangest part, Jacob said. His paperwork doesn't mention the foal at all. Either he doesn't know about Miracle or he's deliberately not claiming him for some reason. Emma's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Maybe he doesn't want the responsibility of a potentially special needs foal. Or maybe... Her expression changed as a new possibility occurred to her. Maybe he doesn't want to admit Hope was pregnant when he abandoned her. That would be harder to explain away. Jacob nodded slowly. That makes sense. Claiming a valuable mare is one thing. Admitting you abandoned a pregnant horse is another. Either way, Diane thinks we should ensure Miracle is prominently featured in our testimony. Make it impossible for the judge to ignore his existence. They spent the evening preparing for the hearing, reviewing their documentation and discussing how best to present the evidence of Hope and Miracle's condition. Emma's meticulous records would be crucial, as would Dr. Reyes's professional assessment. Later that night, Mason took the first watch in the barn, settling into the makeshift bed they'd arranged in the tack room. Despite the physical discomfort, he found a certain peace in the quiet presence of the horses. Hope's gentle breathing and Miracle's occasional soft whinnies created a soothing backdrop that belied the tension of their situation. Around midnight, a faint sound outside the barn caught his attention. Setting aside the book he'd been reading, Mason moved silently to the window, careful not to create any silhouette against the dim light inside. In the moonlight, he could make out a figure moving cautiously along the fence line of the paddock. The person was dressed in dark clothing, their face obscured by a baseball cap pulled low. They appeared to be examining the gate, testing its security. Mason's heart pounded as he reached for his phone to call his father. Before he could dial, the beam of a flashlight swept across the yard from the direction of the house. Jacob was already awake and investigating. The intruder froze momentarily, then bolted toward a vehicle Mason hadn't noticed until now, parked with its lights off on the access road beyond their property line. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle sped away, too distant for Mason to identify in the darkness. Jacob reached the barn moments later, shotgun in hand, his expression grim. "Did you see who it was?" Mason asked, stepping outside to meet him. Jacob shook his head. "Too dark, and they were gone too fast." "You?" "No, but they were definitely checking out the paddock gate." They performed a thorough check of the property, finding no other intruders, but discovering that the padlock on the outer gate had been tampered with, though not successfully breached. "I'm calling the sheriff," Jacob decided, his voice tight with anger and concern. "And I think we need to take shifts sleeping out here now, not just check-ins through the night." By morning, Sheriff Miller had taken their report and promised to increase patrols, but they all knew the rural property was simply too isolated for regular police coverage to be effective. "The hearing can't come soon enough," Emma said as they gathered for breakfast, the night's events having left them all tense and sleep-deprived. At least once the judge rules, we'll have legal clarity. Jacob nodded, though his expression remained troubled. Legal clarity doesn't always translate to practical safety, especially out here. As if to emphasize the fragility of their situation, Dr. Reyes called mid-morning with news that sent a fresh wave of anxiety through the family. "I've just heard from a colleague in Arizona," she reported. "Davidson has suddenly sold his property there and appears to be headed back this way. No one's sure exactly where he is right now, but he told someone he has unfinished business in the county." The implication was clear. Davidson wasn't waiting for the legal system to determine Hope's fate. He was taking matters into his own hands. "The hearing's still 5 days away," Emma noted after they hung up, her voice strained. "What if he tries something before then?" Jacob's response was resolute. "Then we'll be ready for him. I didn't go through all this to save those horses just to hand them back to the man who nearly killed them." His determination was reflected in Mason and Emma's faces. Whatever came next, the Thompsons would face it together, bound by their commitment to the mare and foal who had become far more than just rescued animals. They were family now, and family protected their own. The next few days at Willow Creek Ranch took on the atmosphere of a fortress, preparing for siege. Jacob installed additional security lights around the barn and paddock, while Mason reinforced the gates with extra chains and locks. Emma contacted their closest neighbors who agreed to drive by regularly and report any suspicious activity. Sheriff Miller increased patrols as much as his limited resources allowed, but everyone knew that in such a rural area, the family would largely be on their own if trouble came. Despite the tension, they maintained as normal a routine as possible for Hope and Miracle. The foal continued to thrive, his coordination improving noticeably each day. At nearly a month old, he was developing the playful personality typical of healthy foals, initiating games of chase with his mother and showing increasing curiosity about the world beyond the paddock. "We should document his progress on video," Emma suggested one morning as they watched Miracle testing his speed with short bursts of galloping. "It could be important for the hearing to show how well he's developing under our care." Jacob agreed, and they began recording daily videos of both horses, capturing Miracle's growing strength and Hope's continued recovery. The transformation from the desperate, skeletal mare they had found protecting her newborn foal to the healthy, alert horse who now grazed contentedly in their paddock was remarkable. Dr. Reyes visited 2 days before the scheduled hearing, conducting a thorough examination of both horses for her testimony. "Miracle is doing better than I ever expected," she confirmed, watching the foal prance around his mother. "He's still smaller than he should be for his age, but his development is catching up. His lungs sound clear, his heart is strong, and his leg muscles are developing normally." "And Hope?" Jacob asked. "She's made an excellent recovery. Her weight is nearly ideal now, her coat shows good nutrition, and those old wounds have healed well." The vet's expression grew more serious. "The scars will always be there, though. Physical evidence of the neglect she suffered. They'll be important for the judge to see." That evening, as dusk settled over the ranch, the family gathered on the porch, the conversation inevitably turning to the upcoming hearing and what might follow. What if the judge rules in Davidson's favor? Emma voiced the fear they had all been carrying. What if he orders us to return Hope? Jacob was silent for a long moment, his weathered face grave in the fading light. "Let's cross that bridge if we come to it," he finally said, though his tone suggested he had already considered various contingencies. Mason, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly straightened in his chair. "Someone's coming," he said, nodding toward the long driveway where dust rose in the distance, illuminated by the setting sun. They watched tensely as a pickup truck they didn't recognize approached the house. Jacob stood, moving protectively in front of his children, as the vehicle stopped and a man emerged. He was in his 50s, with the lean, hard build of someone who worked with his hands and a face weathered by sun and wind. "That's not Davidson," Emma whispered, recognizing from photos that this man was older and more rugged than the horse breeder who had abandoned hope. The stranger approached cautiously, seeming to sense their wariness. "Evening," he called, stopping a respectful distance from the porch steps. "Name's Ray Harlan. I used to work for Carter Davidson." Jacob's posture remained guarded. "What brings you here, Mr. Harlan?" "Heard about the hearing. Thought you folks should know what you're dealing with." He gestured toward the porch. "Mind if I come up? What I've got to say isn't for anyone else's ears." After a moment's consideration, Jacob nodded, though he remained alert as Harlan climbed the steps and took the seat offered to him. "I worked at Davidson's place for about 8 months," Harlan began without preamble. "Started as a general hand, ended up managing the stables after he fired the previous guy for coddling the horses." His mouth twisted with distaste at the memory. "What exactly does coddling mean?" Emma asked, her voice tight. "Proper feed, regular veterinary care, basic decency." Harlan's weathered face hardened. "Davidson sees horses as investments, nothing more. When they're profitable, he treats them adequately. When they're not..." He trailed off, his implication clear. "Like Hope," Mason said quietly. Harlan nodded. "The mare you call Hope, we knew her as Goldie, was one of his better purchases, at least on paper. Good bloodlines, good conformation. But she turned out to be difficult to breed. After 2 failed attempts with expensive studs, Davidson lost patience. Started cutting corners on her care, saying she wasn't worth the investment anymore." "When did you last see her?" Jacob asked. "About 7 months ago. That's when I quit. Couldn't stomach his methods anymore." Harlan's hands clenched briefly on his knees. He'd moved her to the back paddock by then, where he put the horses he was planning to phase out. "When I realized she was pregnant after all," I told him. "Thought it might change how he was treating her." "But it didn't," Emma guessed, her voice soft with anger. "Made it worse, actually. He said the foal would probably be worthless too, given how difficult she'd been." Harlan looked up, meeting their eyes directly. "I should have done something then. Reported him, taken the horses, something, but I just quit and walked away. Been regretting it ever since." "So why come forward now?" Mason asked, his natural caution evident. "Saw the notice about the hearing in the county paper, recognized the description of the mare." Harlan's expression was grim. "Davidson's not just after the horse, he's after his reputation. If he loses this case, if a judge officially rules that he neglected and abandoned his animals, his business is finished. No one will sell to him, breed with his stock, or buy from him. And he knows that," Jacob concluded. Harlan nodded. "Which makes him desperate. And Davidson desperate is Davidson dangerous." "Have you spoken to animal control?" Emma asked. "Your testimony could be crucial." "Gave a statement yesterday," Harlan confirmed. "I'll be at the hearing too. But I wanted to warn you personally." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Davidson arrived back in the county last night. He's staying at the Red Creek Motel on the North Highway. And he's not alone. Brought 2 men with him who used to help him handle difficult situations." A tense silence followed this revelation. The Red Creek Motel was less than 30 minutes from Willow Creek Ranch. "Why tell us this?" Jacob finally asked. "You don't know us." Harlan stood, his expression somber in the gathering darkness. "Because I did nothing once, and those horses suffered for it. Not making the same mistake twice." He reached into his pocket and handed Jacob a business card. "My number's on there. Any trouble before the hearing, you call. I owe that mare that much at least." After Harlan departed, the family moved their discussion to the barn, where they could keep watch over Hope and Miracle while planning their next steps. "I'll sleep out here tonight," Jacob decided. "Mason, you take first watch, then wake me at midnight." "I'll stay too," Emma insisted. "We should have someone watching the house and someone watching the barn." As they settled in for what promised to be a long night, Miracle approached the stall door, poking his curious nose through the bars, as if sensing their concern. Hope stood behind him, her eyes alert, her stance protective of her foal even in the safety of their stall. "One more day," Jacob murmured, reaching out to stroke Miracle's soft muzzle. "Just one more day until the hearing." But as darkness enveloped the ranch, bringing with it the eerie calls of nightbirds and the rustling of wind through the trees, one thought remained unspoken among them. Davidson might not wait for the legal system to run its course. And if he came for Hope and Miracle before morning, they would need to be ready. Night descended fully over Willow Creek Ranch, bringing with it a heavy silence broken only by the occasional rustle of animals in the surrounding fields. Inside the barn, Mason settled into his watch position, a thermos of coffee at his side and a shotgun within reach. He wasn't a man who sought conflict, but Harlan's warning had left little doubt about the potential threat they faced. In the house, Emma kept vigilant by the window overlooking the driveway, her phone close at hand, ready to alert her father and brother at the first sign of trouble. Jacob, meanwhile, had positioned himself in the shadows near the barn entrance where he could observe the approach to both buildings without being easily spotted. Hope and Miracle slept peacefully in their stall, unaware of the human tensions swirling around them. The foal had nestled close to his mother's side, his slender legs tucked beneath him, his breathing deep and even. Hope's ears occasionally flicked at the night sounds, but the wariness that had once dominated her every waking moment had softened into the normal alertness of a protective dam. The hours passed with excruciating slowness. At midnight, Mason emerged from the barn to trade places with his father, the exchange made in hushed tones that wouldn't disturb the sleeping horses. "All quiet?" Jacob asked, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness from hours of waiting. "Nothing moving out there," Mason confirmed. "Emma called a few minutes ago. House is secure too." Jacob nodded, accepting the thermos his son offered. "Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Mason hesitated. "What if Davidson doesn't wait for the hearing? What if he comes tonight?" "Then we deal with it," Jacob replied simply, his weathered face resolute in the dim light. "But legally, no matter what, we do this by the book." After Mason departed for the house, Jacob took up his position in the barn, settling on a bale of hay with a clear view of both Hope's stall and the main entrance. Despite his outward calm, his mind was racing, considering and discarding various scenarios for how the next 24 hours might unfold. Around 2 a.m, a soft sound from Hope's stall drew his attention. The mare was awake, standing alert with her ears pricked forward, listening intently. Miracle remained asleep, but Hope's entire body had tensed, her nostrils flaring as she tested the air. Jacob rose silently, moving to the stall door. "What is it, girl?" he whispered, following her gaze toward the far wall of the barn. For a moment there was nothing, just shadows and silence. Then he heard it, the faint crunch of gravel under a cautious footstep, somewhere outside the back of the barn. Moving with deliberate care to avoid making noise, Jacob retrieved his shotgun and edged toward the small rear window. The security light they had installed cast a harsh glow over the back paddock, but the shadows beyond its reach were deep and impenetrable. Another sound, the soft metallic click of the paddock gate being tested. Jacob strained to see through the darkness, finally making out a silhouette moving along the fence line. Just one person, from what he could tell, methodically checking each potential entry point. Jacob reached for his phone to alert Mason, then froze as a voice drifted through the night, low but clear enough in the silence. "Lock tight. We'll need the bolt cutters." A second voice answered, too distant for Jacob to make out the words, but the implication was clear. There was more than one intruder, and they were planning to breach the paddock. Moving quickly now, Jacob texted Mason a terse warning. "2 men at back paddock trying to break in, call sheriff." Then he positioned himself by the rear barn door, shotgun ready but pointed safely upward. He wouldn't fire unless absolutely necessary, but the intruders didn't need to know that. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Jacob could hear occasional murmurs of conversation outside, but no further attempts to enter the paddock. Then, suddenly, the security light went dark. Someone had disabled it. In the new darkness, Jacob strained to hear any movement. From Hope's stall came a soft, anxious whicker as the mare sensed the tension. Miracle, awakened by his mother's distress, rose to stand beside her, his small form pressed against her protective flank. The sound of splintering wood broke the silence, not from the paddock gate as Jacob had expected, but from a side window of the barn itself. They were coming in directly, bypassing the paddock entirely. Acting on instinct, Jacob moved to block the path between the window and Hope's stall. As a dark figure began to squeeze through the opening, he raised the shotgun and pumped it once, the sound unmistakable in the confined space. "That's far enough," he called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Sheriff's been called. You'd best back out the way you came in." The figure froze, then dropped back outside with a muffled curse. Moments later, Jacob heard hurried footsteps retreating into the darkness. Mason appeared at the main barn door, his own shotgun in hand. "Did they get in?" he asked tersely. "Tried to, through that side window," Jacob indicated with a nod. "Backed off when they realized I was waiting." Emma's voice came through on Mason's phone, set to speaker. "Sheriff's deputy is on his way. ETA 15 minutes. Everything okay there?" "They've backed off for now," Jacob confirmed, "but stay alert. They might try the house next." As they spoke, the distinctive sound of a vehicle engine starting came from somewhere beyond the property line, followed by the crunch of tires on dirt as it pulled away. "They're leaving," Mason observed, moving cautiously to peer out the window. "Or regrouping," Jacob cautioned. "Let's not assume anything." When the sheriff's deputy arrived 13 minutes later, they found no one on the property, but clear evidence of the attempted break-in, footprints in the soft earth behind the barn, a damaged window frame, and bolt cutters abandoned near the paddock gate in the intruder's hasty retreat. "Looks like you scared them off," Deputy Wilson observed as he examined the scene. "Any idea who they were?" "We have our suspicions," Jacob replied grimly. "Carter Davidson arrived back in town yesterday. He's trying to reclaim the mare before tomorrow's hearing." The deputy nodded, making notes in his report. "I'll have a car drive by every hour for the rest of the night. Not much else we can do without catching them in the act." After the deputy left, the family gathered in the barn, the brief excitement having fully awakened Hope and Miracle. The foal pranced nervously in the stall, picking up on the tension around him, while Hope stood watchful, her eyes tracking every movement. "They'll be back," Mason said quietly. "Maybe not tonight, but they will be back." Jacob nodded, his expression resolute. "Then we'll be ready. We've come too far to lose Hope and Miracle now." Emma approached the stall, speaking softly to calm the agitated foal. "Just a few more hours until dawn," she murmured, as much to herself as to the horses. "Then we go to the hearing, and this nightmare can finally end." But as the family settled in to wait out the remaining hours of darkness, each lost in their own thoughts, a shared understanding passed between them. The hearing might provide legal resolution, but Davidson's nocturnal visit had made one thing abundantly clear. This wasn't just about ownership anymore. It was about protection, about standing firm against cruelty and indifference, about fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Hope, as if sensing these unspoken thoughts, moved to the front of the stall and extended her muzzle toward Jacob. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out to stroke her forelock, the gesture sealing a silent pact between them. "We won't let you down," he promised softly. "Either of you." Beyond the barn, the first faint lightening of the eastern sky heralded the approach of dawn, and with it, the day that would determine Hope and Miracle's fate. Dawn broke over Willow Creek Ranch, bathing the landscape in golden light that belied the tension of the night before. After reporting the attempted break-in to Diane Mercer, the family prepared for the hearing with a mixture of determination and apprehension. Dr. Reyes arrived early to conduct one final examination of Hope and Miracle, ensuring their documentation was complete and current. "They're both in excellent condition now," she confirmed, watching as the foal pranced around his mother in the morning light. "The contrast with their state when you found them is stark. The photos and my medical records should make that abundantly clear to the judge." Jacob nodded, his expression grave. "Let's hope it's enough." Before departing for the courthouse, they ensured the horses would be safe in their absence. 2 neighbors had volunteered to stay at the ranch, one in the house and one in the barn, armed and alert for any sign of trouble. Sheriff Miller had also promised to have a deputy drive by regularly throughout the day. The county courthouse stood imposing in the morning sun, its brick facade and columned entrance lending gravity to the proceedings about to take place within. As the Thompsons approached, they noticed a small crowd gathered near the steps, other ranchers, neighbors, and community members who had heard about Hope and Miracle's story and come to show their support. Inside, the hearing room was smaller than they had expected, with wooden benches arranged in neat rows facing the judge's bench. Diane Mercer met them at the door, her usual stern expression softened slightly by what might have been cautious optimism. "Davidson and his attorney are already here," she murmured, nodding toward the front row where a well-dressed man in his 40s sat beside an equally polished lawyer. "And Ray Harlan came through. He's waiting to be called as a witness." As they took their seats, Davidson turned to glance at them, his expression cold and calculating. Jacob met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by the man who had abandoned Hope and nearly cost Miracle his life. The hearing began with formal introductions. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing eyes, establishing the parameters of the case with brisk efficiency. Davidson's attorney spoke first, presenting their claim that Hope had been stolen or had escaped, and that any neglect had occurred after she left Davidson's care, not before. "My client is a respected breeder with years of experience," the lawyer argued smoothly. "He would never abandon a valuable mare, especially one with her bloodlines and potential. The fact that she was found without identification tags suggests tampering by whoever took her from Mr. Davidson's property." When it was their turn, Diane presented the evidence methodically. Photographs of Hope's condition when found, Dr. Reyes's detailed medical assessment, the documentation of similar neglect in the horses found on Davidson's foreclosed property, and finally, the testimony of Ray Harlan about the conditions he had witnessed while employed by Davidson. Emma's detailed records of Hope and Miracle's recovery proved particularly compelling, especially when paired with recent photographs and videos showing their transformation under the Thompsons' care. The mare was severely malnourished and dehydrated when found, Dr. Reyes testified, her professional demeanor lending weight to her words. She had untreated wounds consistent with long-term neglect, not recent injury. Most significantly, she had given birth prematurely, almost certainly due to stress and poor nutrition during pregnancy. Throughout the proceedings, Davidson's expression grew increasingly tense, especially when Miracle was mentioned. His attorney had attempted to focus solely on Hope, avoiding any discussion of the foal, but Diane skillfully kept bringing the conversation back to the pregnant mare, abandoned to give birth alone in dangerous conditions. When Jacob was called to testify, he spoke simply and directly about finding Hope, about her protective stance over her newborn foal, and about the care they had provided since. She was dying, he stated plainly. Both of them were. She used the last of her strength to keep that foal alive until someone found them. That's not an animal who escaped or was stolen. That's an animal who was abandoned by someone who didn't care if she lived or died. As the evidence mounted, Davidson conferred urgently with his attorney, their whispered conversation growing increasingly heated. Finally, during a brief recess, the attorney approached Diane with an unexpected proposal. "My client is willing to drop his claim to the Mare," he offered, in exchange for the county dropping any potential animal cruelty charges. Diane's eyes narrowed. "And the foal?" "Mr. Davidson makes no claim to the foal," the attorney confirmed smoothly. "He was unaware of the pregnancy and considers the foal separate from his property claim." When the hearing resumed, the judge listened to the proposed settlement with a neutral expression before addressing Davidson directly. "Mr. Davidson, you're willing to relinquish all claims to the Mare known as Golden Opportunity, now called Hope?" Davidson nodded stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you acknowledge you make no claim to her foal?" "I do." The judge considered this for a moment, then turned to Diane. "Ms. Mercer, is the county amenable to this arrangement?" Diane stood. "The county is prepared to accept Mr. Davidson's relinquishment of claims to both animals, Your Honor. However, we cannot agree to dropping the ongoing investigation into potential animal cruelty. The evidence presented today will be considered as part of that investigation, which remains open." Davidson's jaw tightened visibly, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm. The judge nodded. "Very well. Given Mr. Davidson's relinquishment of claim, I hereby declare that legal ownership of the Mare known as Hope and her foal Miracle shall be transferred to Willow Creek Ranch with Jacob Thompson as the registered owner." She fixed Davidson with a stern look. "And Mr. Davidson, while this resolves the ownership dispute, it does not shield you from any consequences of the ongoing investigation. This court takes animal welfare very seriously." With a sharp rap of her gavel, she concluded the hearing, leaving Davidson fuming but powerless to reclaim what he had so callously discarded. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by well-wishers and neighbors offering congratulations, the Thompson family could finally breathe easy. Hope and Miracle were legally theirs, safe from the man who had abandoned them. "What about the men who tried to break in last night?" Emma asked Diane as they prepared to leave. "Sheriff's deputies are looking for them," she assured them, "and with Davidson having officially relinquished his claim, any attempt to take the horses now would be straightforward theft, not a property dispute. I don't think he'll risk it." By late afternoon, they had returned to Willow Creek Ranch, eager to share the good news with the horses who had unwittingly been at the center of such conflict. As they approached the paddock, they found Hope lying peacefully in the grass, Miracle nestled against her side in the warm sunshine. 7 ranch hands from neighboring properties stood watching from a respectful distance, friends and neighbors who had gathered to ensure no harm came to the horses during the family's absence. Their presence, a silent wall of protection, embodied the community's rejection of cruelty and embrace of compassion. "It's over," Jacob said softly as they joined the watchers. "They're home for good." Hope raised her head at their approach, her eyes calm and trusting as she recognized the humans who had saved her and her foal. Miracle, growing stronger every day but still small for his age, remained snuggled against his mother's protective form, secure in the knowledge that he was safe. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the peaceful scene, Emma captured one final photograph. Hope lying in the golden light with Miracle beside her, surrounded at a respectful distance by the people who had fought to protect them. It was an image of triumph, of healing, of a community united by compassion. From abandoned and alone to beloved and protected, Emma murmured, lowering her camera. That's quite a journey. Their journey's just beginning, Jacob replied, his weathered face softened by a rare smile. And so is ours. In the paddock, as if understanding his words, Hope gently nuzzled her foal, their golden coats gleaming in the setting sun, no longer abandoned, no longer merely surviving, but truly living, truly home.